is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life. Welcome to the Duck Milk Prod YouTube channel. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and this live stream is part of a series I am calling Reading Reviews with Rebecca, which will analyze the critical reception of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice through the negative reviews written by top critics from Rotten Tomatoes, one review at a time. This is not meant to belittle anyone's opinions, but rather serve as a study of art criticism and how we discuss film. I'm hoping that this endeavor will encourage all of us, that includes me as well, to be better consumers of cinema. This week, I'll be reading through a review from Vulture titled "The Overstuffed Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice Builds a World, but is it one we want?" Written by David Edelstein, or Edelstein, or Edelstein, or Edelstein. I'm not sure. Hopefully one of those is the correct pronunciation, because I always want to try to get people's names right. So I hope I did not mispronounce David's name. So to prevent that in the future, we'll just refer to David as David so that I don't screw up his name any further. But if you would like to click on the review and read it for yourself, which I highly recommend that you do, there's a link in the video description below. So if you'd like to follow along and read it for yourself, you can do that. If David should ever see this video, I just want to say that I'm aiming to do this as civilly and analytically as possible, and I would ask that anyone watching live or posting in the comments would do the same. I'm simply taking a look at the criticism for and of BVS now from an historical point of view, given that these reviews were used by Warner Brothers in their decision-making process regarding the DC Extended Universe. Due to the poor reviews for Batman v Superman, the tone and approach to the franchise were changed for Justice League and ultimately led to the destruction of Zack Snyder's 5-film arc and what is commonly known as the Snyderverse, although some would argue that the Snyderverse still exists because of Jason Momoa's Aquaman and Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman. But for the sake of this series, I'm going to refer to the Snyderverse as the story that Snyder was trying to tell. Before I get into David's thoughts, though, I'm sure that there are some viewers who might check this out and say, well, David is a film critic from a major news outlet who is included on Rotten Tomatoes. Who cares what you have to say, Rebecca? And you know what? I totally get that. It's a question I would ask, and I think it's a fair one. So I'm going to provide you with a little background on me. So hopefully that will help people understand what I can bring to the film analysis and film review table. I graduated from the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, with a degree in telecommunications and film and a focus on broadcast television production. While I've never been to film school, in my television and production experience, I've learned about and have lots of practice in operating cameras, shot composition, and editing. Lighting, green screen, and audio are my weak spots, admittedly, but I've been working on those. After working in local TV news, running cameras, and working in production, I got a job at Turner, now Warner Media, or whatever they're calling themselves now, for 14 years. I worked with networks, or brands as they call them now, like TBS, TNT, Adult Swim, Cartoon Network, Boomerang, True TV, and Turner Classic Movies as a video encoding specialist. I also did a fair amount of closed captioning work and DVD and Blu-ray QC. In case you are wondering how I podcasted about Supergirl and the DCEU films while working for a Time Warner company, I actually got permission and clearance from my human resources representative. If you think I wouldn't criticize stories that were under the same corporate umbrella, that was never a problem nor a concern for me. If I thought the Supergirl TV series or a DCEU film had faults, I said so. In the last 17 years, I have served as a director, technical director, and camera operator at my local church in a live production capacity. I've been a video editor for 17 years, having worked in Avid, Final Cut, and Premiere Pro CC. In my day job, I shoot and edit news and documentary-style video content that involves interviews and narrative storytelling. I'm also currently an amateur photographer and am aiming to improve my efforts in still photography. You can check out my work over at Instagram at @TheDerbyKid. Link is in the video description below. While discussing these film reviews, music and film scores will inevitably come up. It may be good to know that in my life I have played piano, handbells, clarinet, bass clarinet, bassoon, acoustic guitar, and have even started learning how to play the ukulele. I've played in marching bands, symphonic bands, and wind ensembles, and have sung in many choirs. While I don't consider myself a world-class musician, far from it, actually, I do know some things about music and am a big fan of film scores and soundtracks. In addition to my production and musical experience, I have had lots of experience in art criticism. I've been podcasting about television and film since 2009 and do so on a regular basis with Supergirl Radio, a podcast I co-host about the CW Supergirl TV series. I am also a writing contributor to the Justice League Universe podcast that offers analysis on the DCEU films. You might even hear my voice occasionally in recordings and audio commentaries over there. I'm not an expert, but I care deeply about film, television, storytelling, and art. So I hope this gives you a background on where I'm coming from. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way and you kind of know what I am about and who I am, let's get into David's review. So I like to start with the title just because that's a good place to start right at the beginning. So the title for this review is The Overstuffed Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice Builds a World, but is it one we want? And I actually appreciate this title for this review because at least David here, or maybe David's editor, I'm not sure who actually came up with the review title. It could have been editor, but we'll just say that whoever came up with this title actually made an attempt to have a creative title. Some of these top critic reviews don't even have titles. Sometimes they're just called something like Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice movie review or something akin to that. So a lot of them are actually pretty boring. So at least this one attempted to have a creative title and do something with that space instead of just being kind of plain and boring. I disagree with the film being overstuffed, but what I find more of a mistake, in my opinion, in this title is the question that asks, but is it one we want? As if David is speaking for everyone in the entire world. I would much more prefer that David speak for himself and give his perspective than trying to speak for me or anyone else, because there's no there's no way for David to actually know what everyone in the whole world wants. David can only know what he wants. So that's if I was David's editor, I would probably change that to reflect that idea. So getting into the actual content of the review, David writes, quote, with Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, the movie division of DC Entertainment and the parent studio Warner Brothers has given the fanboys and the Nolanoids what they crave. And lo, it is impressive, and lo, it is god-awful. Those aren't mutually exclusive. If, and I should say unquote, that's kind of where I'm stopping in the review. I try to make sure that people know where I'm reading from the review and when I'm actually speaking on behalf of me. So now I'm actually speaking with my thoughts. So if I didn't need to read this review for this particular project that I'm doing, I would probably stop reading after this first sentence. Right away, I don't take it seriously as film analysis or a film critique because it's not about the film at all. David opened up this review mentioning fanboys as if that was a negative thing, and for some reason called those fans Nolanoids. This film wasn't directed by Christopher Nolan. I would actually understand it, the Nolanoid thing, if that's what they're called. I don't know. I'm a big Christopher Nolan fan, and I don't know that I've ever heard Christopher Nolan fans describe themselves as Nolanoids. So this may be something that David is doing to speak down to Christopher Nolan fans. I'm not really sure. Any case, this film wasn't directed by Christopher Nolan. He only has an executive producer credit on Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, and that's it. So I don't understand why so many of these top critic reviews of this film do this. Why do they mention Christopher Nolan even though he this isn't his film. That's just a fact. That is just a true fact. This is not a film directed by Christopher Nolan. So I have a hard time understanding why they do this. And also, why is it bad to give fans what they crave? Isn't that part of what adapting an intellectual property is all about? Zack Snyder has actually, I've heard him talk about his way of filmmaking. And the way he approaches filmmaking is that he makes a film for himself. He makes a film that he would enjoy, which I think is actually a great way to make a film. That's a great approach to filmmaking. But I think what actually benefits Zack Snyder in terms of his DC films is that he's actually a big fan of the DC universe and of comic books himself. So his work, even though he's making the films for himself, because he is a fan, that is reflected into his work. And that actually is why fans enjoy, why some fans, I guess I should say, why the fans who enjoy his work, because he's actually pretty faithful to the source material. And so that naturally plays into what fans would want. So Zack Snyder can actually have it both ways. He can make a film for himself, but he can also make a film that fans, at least fans who like his work and like what he's doing, can be on board with, because he is trying to honor the comics and the source material he's pulling from. I find it to be an interesting contradiction for David to say that BVS is somehow both impressive and god-awful at the same time. I was really struggling with this when I was reading this, because I was trying to figure out how can that be? Because Merriam-Webster, which is my preferred dictionary, I don't know about anybody else, but I usually go to Merriam-Webster. It's been around for a long time, and it has a lot of definitions. And so I trust Merriam-Webster more than probably any other dictionary, just because it's so well known and has such a storied history. So anyway, that's the definition I'm pulling from for impressive, which means having the power to excite attention, awe, or admiration. So how could a film have the power to excite admiration, which means you admire it, you look at it with awe, and be god awful at the same time? David says the two terms aren't mutually exclusive, but aren't they? To be mutually exclusive means impressive and god awful are unable to be both true at the same time. So, in my opinion, they are mutually exclusive. You can't have something both be impressive and god awful at the same time. So, in my opinion, no matter what his argumentation is for this in the review, and I think he's going to get there. We'll see as we continue to go into it. But no matter what his argumentation is for this, saying that they aren't mutually exclusive is it's just false. You can't have those things be true at the same time. So David goes on to say, quote, "The imagery is mythic, otherworldly, a further step away from the color popping panels of illustrator Brian Bolin of The Killing Joke," unquote. I agree here with David that the imagery is mythic and otherworldly. And I even like that David uses those words to describe it here. I think those are great words to use for the cinematography of Larry Fong and the visuals as directed by Zack Snyder. I think those are actually both very applicable to and very descriptive of what we see in BVS. But I do have a question about The Killing Joke. What does BVS have to do with The Killing Joke? The Killing Joke wasn't used as inspiration for the story of Batman v Superman, and Joker's not in it other than the Robin suit that we see in the Batcave that has Joker's handwriting on it. So I don't understand why there's a reference to The Killing Joke. I could see making a reference to The Killing Joke in a Joker film review, because The Killing Joke is used for Todd Phillips's Joker with Joaquin Phoenix. So that I would understand being referenced there, but not Dawn of Justice. I have no idea why it's here other than the fact that Batman is a character in both stories. The only thing I can guess is that the animated version of The Killing Joke was released on July 22nd, 2016, which was just a few months after Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice hit theaters. So maybe David here is making a comparison of the two films because they were within months of each other. But other than that, I don't really understand why The Killing Joke is mentioned in this review. Moving on, quote, "And toward the dense doominess of Frank Miller, the man-machine sci-fi fusions of H.R. Geiger and the biblical hell of William Blake," unquote. Doominess, in my research, is not a word that can be found in Merriam-Webster's Dictionary. I did look this up. I always try to make sure I understand the terms that these reviewers are using. So I always try to, I know it seems like a nitpick, but I always want to make sure I understand what they're trying to say with their words. So doominess, when I looked it up in Merriam-Webster, the dictionary told me the word you've entered isn't in the dictionary. So it gave me some other words that it thought I might have meant, but doominess was not a word in Merriam-Webster's dictionary. I did find a doomie in the freedictionary.com, which I don't use as much, but doomie is a word in there meaning despondent or pessimistic, depressing, frightening, or chilling. And funny enough, because I use Google Docs for these reviews so that I can write out my notes and keep a searchable archive so I can go back to whatever review I had been talking about previously and use a search function for that if I can't remember which review mentioned what. Google Docs is great for that. And when I put doominess in the Google Docs, Google said that it was an unknown word and that I should consider respelling or adding it to my personal dictionary. So doominess is a questionable word here, but I will just go with it. I guess the free dictionary said it was a word, so I guess maybe that's where David pulled it from. I also, in terms of Frank Miller, I understand the reference to Frank Miller here, as BBS does pay homage to his work, The Dark Knight Returns. So that is an understandable reference there. H.R. Geiger, though, I have a lot of questions about H.R. Geiger being mentioned here. So according to the Batman Wiki, H.R. Geiger was a Swiss artist and industrial designer. Joel Schumacher chose Geiger to redesign the Batmobile for Batman 3, which would have been Batman Forever. The design was never finalized. Only 4 rough conceptual sketches were completed. It was quickly abandoned, deemed too radical and too difficult to realize at the time. As far as I know, Zack Snyder didn't pull any inspiration from H.R. Geiger, and I'm not even sure what David is talking about here. Just in case people aren't familiar with Geiger's designs for the Batmobile, I did find some on the interwebs. So you can go look at at some of these sketches that are referenced here. And I guess this is what David's referencing in this review is the H.R. Geiger version of the Batmobile. There were a couple of sketches and designs that I could find for it. It is a very different design for the Batmobile, quite the departure from what we would consider to be a car, I guess you could say. But that's the only thing I can think of as to why H.R. Geiger could have been referenced in this review. So I have so many questions. So if I ever met David, I would ask him if that was what he was referring to in this review. Let's see. I'm also not even sure what David is talking about in terms of man-machine sci-fi fusions. In my opinion, there's barely any sci-fi in the film except for a couple of things. Maybe it's referring to the creation of Doomsday, maybe the birth of Cyborg, and the communion of Steppenwolf. Those are kind of sci-fi, but for the most part, BVS is kind of a mixture of a revenge play mixed with a political thriller. So it doesn't really rely on the sci-fi aspects of it as much. I would say Man of Steel is probably more sci-fi than Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. So that I have a hard time understanding the sci-fi element that he's referring to. So I can only guess. All right. Also, in his references here, he also mentions William Blake. I had to look him up. I guess David's a little smarter than me, a little more cultured and well-rounded. But William Blake, if you don't know, like I didn't know, just confessing my ignorance here. So William Blake is he was an English poet, not referenced in BBS as far as I know, any of his poems. And I don't think, as far as I know, that Chris Terrio used him as any inspiration for the script or the dialogue. He did write a book in 1793 titled The Marriage of Heaven and Hell that included the Proverbs of Heaven and Hell. The Marriage of Heaven and Hell is a book by the English poet and printmaker William Blake. It is a series of texts written in imitation of biblical prophecy, but expressing Blake's own intensely personal romantic, capital R, and revolutionary beliefs. Like his other books, it was published as printed sheets from etched plates containing prose, poetry, and allusions. And it even says, I pulled all of this from Wikipedia if anybody's interested. This is just general knowledge as a starting place. The plates were then colored by Blake and his wife, Catherine. William Blake claims that John Milton was a true poet and his epic poem Paradise Lost was, quote, of the devil's party without knowing it, unquote. He also claims that Milton's Satan was truly his Messiah. So that's questionable. Continuing on, the work was composed between 1790 and 1793 in the period of the radical ferment and political conflict during the French Revolution. So I could go on and on and on, but I think the most relevant aspect of this description is, let's see. I guess I could also mention the title is an ironic reference to Emanuel Swedenborg's theological work Heaven and Hell, published in Latin 33 years earlier, than Blake's work. Swedenborg is directly cited and criticized by Blake in several places in The Marriage. Though Blake was influenced by his grand and mystical cosmic conception, Swedenborg's conventional moral strictures and his Manichaean view of good and evil led Blake to express a deliberately depolarized and unified vision of the cosmos in which the material world and physical desire are equally part of the divine order, hence a marriage of heaven and hell. The book is written in prose except for the opening argument and the Song of Liberty. The book describes the poet's visit to hell, a device adopted by Blake from Dante's Divine Comedy and Milton's Paradise Lost. So, in my opinion, that sure is a long way to get to the painting in Lex Luthor's office, which I did have a, let's see, did I download that? I did do a comparison image of that, but I guess I did not upload it. Maybe I could find it, but it seems like that is what maybe David is getting to there, is because there is a painting in Lex Luthor's office that is, let's see, Gustave Doré or Doors, The Fall of the Rebel Angels, which was included in book 1 of Paradise Lost by John Milton. So I don't know if the William Blake thing is connected to Paradise Lost. I'm assuming so, but I wish he had just dug into the Paradise Lost connection and the painting connection. That's a little bit more relevant, but even if he wanted to mention William Blake, if I was his editor, I would probably sort of poke and prod him a little more. David, I'm referring to, I would probably poke David a little bit more to expand on that idea. How would you connect William Blake and the heaven and hell stuff to Batman v Superman and your review? That's what I would be interested in. And so for me, this aspect of this review is the most interesting aspect so far. Batman v Superman does delve into Christian themes, good versus evil, the problem of evil, God, man, and the devil. So I guess maybe you could connect William Blake's poetry to the opening monologue from Bruce Wayne talking about perfect things and diamond absolutes, because that is sort of poetry in a way. But other than that, this reference is somewhat hollow. I think you could have, if I were David or David's editor, I think there's a way that you could have expanded on that William Blake mention and really delved into that aspect or that point of view. But as it's referenced in the review, it's a little bit hollow, especially since David really doesn't go into too many details about the connection. I'm making the connection for myself, trying to understand the reference, but David doesn't actually put that in the review. So I would have maybe pushed it a little further, but at least David is actually trying to go into engaging in with the film. So I appreciate that. I'm going to stop here and go into the comments real quick, just to kind of take a break from the review. So Rachel asks, who are they, I guess the reviewers, to say that the world presented in these movies is one nobody wants? That's a great question. I would never dare to speak for anybody else, because I can't. I can only see what I can see from my perspective out of my own eyes. I cannot see the world, Rachel, through your eyes, so I can't speak for you. And vice versa. You can't speak for me because you can't see the world through my eyes. So I always, as a manner of practice, when I'm reviewing something, try to only speak for myself. And I catch myself a lot. It's very easy to speak in generalized terms. So I understand the temptation to do so, but I prefer it that way. That way you're getting the fresh perspective of that reviewer and not everyone in the world. Um, and Rachel also says, "God awful strikes me as an unprofessional word choice." I agree. And also, just for anybody else's knowledge, when I looked up "god awful," I found various spellings of it, and it's not a word that actually has a cemented way of spelling, and I guess definition and terminology. So it's kind of lazy, if I'm honest. So I'm with you there. There's probably a better word to have used in that place, but that is the word that David chose. All right, so continuing on, and thank you, Rachel, for those comments. Good points to bring up. So going back into David's review, he writes, quote, "The movie is no slouch in the content department either. Director Zack Snyder, working from a screenplay by Chris Terrio and David S. Goyer, has set out to deliver a tortured disquisition on society's various imperfect choices for keeping us safe in the wake of 9/11, here represented as the invasion of Kryptonians," and he puts Kryptonians in quotations for some reason, that killed thousands of Metropolis citizens at the close of Snyder's Man of Steel in 2013, unquote. Now, I actually like this section because David is at least trying to form an analysis of what he actually sees in the film. That's what I prefer out of a review. Give me your perspective on what you see presented on screen. I think it's fair to make the 9/11 connections. I think it's intended to be there and harken it back to Man of Steel. There are 9/11 connections there as well. Even mentioning the quote imperfect choices here, unquote, the quote imperfect choices, unquote, here is a great way to put it because the film explores this idea, especially with Superman. He tries to do the right thing and sometimes it blows up in his face, even though that was not his intention. Sometimes there are consequences that come with trying to do the right thing. So I don't mind this section of the review. Going on, David writes, quote, "Batman slash Bruce Wayne has, like so many previously sane individuals following 9/11, gone over to the Dick Cheney-esque dark side, while Superman slash Clark Kent, an anguished alien with Christ-like underpinnings, wrestles with how and when to intervene in mankind's crises, constantly undermined by a Congress questioning his unilateral powers. Wealthy Lex Luthor is the catalyst for catastrophe. So Bats and Soupy fight and stuff blows up real good," unquote. Um, this is another instance where if I was David's editor, I would probably kind of steer him in a further exploration of this. But he mentions the Superman is Christ-like. There's all this mention of William Blake and the heaven and hell stuff, and then he has this Christ-like mention. I would just want him to connect those dots. I think it's much more interesting if you try to connect those dots. They're kind of all kind of scattered through the review, and it's like, well, maybe those mentions were trying to get at something, David. Maybe maybe there are themes in here. Maybe it was trying to be a metaphor of something. So it's just strange to me that a professional critic and a professional film critic would not make those connections and explore that out a little bit more. Um, I do appreciate that David has taken a side on this quandary of the 9/11 stuff and the Dick Cheney mention. I think it's a fair thing to bring up. It's definitely an homage to that. But for me, I give Bruce Wayne a little grace on this. He goes a little crazy. Let's just mention that. But this, in the context of this story, this is the first time that humanity is dealing with aliens. This is the first contact with aliens, and these are superpowered aliens at that. So how would they know that Superman wouldn't go evil on them? I think it's a really fair thing for Bruce Wayne to be like, hey, what if this happens? We got to be prepared for this. And that's true to Batman as a character who has sort of backup plans in case the Justice League goes rogue, goes evil. Batman is the guy who has plans for that just in case. So that's actually true to the character of Batman. So I don't understand why people harsh on him so much. I think it's actually a reasonable response to all of this, especially given what Bruce Wayne sees in Metropolis that day of the Battle of Metropolis between Superman and Zod. The ending of this paragraph, though, is disappointing to me because even after all of that effort to dig into the material that the film puts forth, David ends up with what he thinks is a joke to to do nothing other than take a swipe at a film he didn't care for. That one snarky sentence about bats and Soupy fight and blow stuff up real good. Um, that's also kind of, I don't know, it sounds like he's making fun of Southern people also, which I find offensive as a Southern person for all of my life. We don't all talk like that and blowing up stuff real good. That's an exaggerated stereotype. Let's maybe not do that. I don't really appreciate that, but that one snarky sentence wipes out, in my opinion, any good analysis that came before it, and I think that's unfortunate because he David was going somewhere. He was making some good points and trying to articulate what he thought about the film. And I'm like, I kind of disagree with you a little bit, but hey, you're doing it. You're doing it. And then that snarky comment just sucks out all the air from what came before. Then David writes, quote, "It's a shame that Batman v Superman is also a storytelling disgrace," unquote. David actually had some really interesting things to say about heaven and hell and how Superman and Batman would have to deal with real life situations. And then he calls BVS a storytelling disgrace. In my opinion, that's a little contradictory. If you got meaning out of a film, how is it a storytelling disgrace? Is he saying that's a storytelling disgrace because he thinks the script is bad? And if that's the case, that's a fair thing to point out. But he doesn't really say that. I think it would be maybe more apt uh, to say that maybe, I don't know, that you found things provoking in the film, but maybe you felt that the script or the way the story was told were maybe not the best choices. I think that maybe that's a better way to explain it. But to say it was a storytelling disgrace, I don't know. I think that's maybe unfair because right before that, David's going into how some of these big ideas are kind of interesting. And then to say it was a storytelling disgrace, I need a little more information as to why David thinks that. I'm just having to assume what rather than David telling me why it's a storytelling disgrace. Um, with these reviews, they're written before and released before the film actually comes out into theaters, and so they don't really uh, care to explain those things to you. And sometimes they feel like they can't because they don't want to spoil anything. But I think if you're going to write the word storytelling disgrace, I think you owe it to the reader to explain why you think that. So that I think is a misfire in terms of the review. David goes on to say, quote, "It has maybe 6 opening scenes and jumps so incessantly from subplot to subplot to subplot that a script doctor would diagnose a peculiarly moderate infection, disjunctivitis. Said infection is the upshot of a sort of gene splicing," unquote. I can understand this criticism. BVS does open with a flashback to the death of the Waynes and then goes to Bruce in Metropolis and then goes to Lois in Africa. So it could seem like a lot of opening scenes if you're viewing it in that way. But to me, aren't those just introductory scenes telling us what the characters are up to? I think the death of the Waynes and then seeing Bruce in Metropolis actually go together. So to me, that's one long sequence. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what David would rather have the film do because to me those scenes aren't disjointed at all. In fact, by the end of the film, it's revealed that they all very connected. So I'm trying to understand why he thinks those are disjointed. David also goes on to say, quote, "For a studio to move beyond the franchise and tentpole stages to the vastly lucrative universe, a comic book movie must at every turn gesture towards sequels and spinoffs, teasing out loose ends and cultivating irresolution," unquote. How so in terms of cultivating irresolution? I understand the sequels and the spinoffs and all of that and the franchise and setting up the universe. That all makes a lot of sense. But I don't know what David means when he writes cultivating irresolution. I wish I knew more about what David's talking about there. He goes on to write, quote, "The movie wanders into so many irrelevant byways that it comes to seem abstract," unquote. So maybe that's what he's talking about with cultivating irresolution. But also it's still just very vague. Um, what are the irrelevant byways? What parts of the film aren't relevant? I would argue all of the scenes and all of the parts of the film are relevant, and they lead to the bigger story and inform everything about the characters and what they're going through. So I would be curious to know what David thought were the irrelevant parts of it. Um, and this goes back to the idea that they can't be too explicit or explain things too in depth and in detail because they think it's going to spoil the film. I think you could probably talk about certain things without spoiling anything in great detail. So I just, as a reader, I wish I knew more of what David was actually talking about, because otherwise it's just a bunch of vague words that have mostly no meaning because I don't know what he's talking about. um, David goes on to say, quote, "There's enough going to keep you watching, and as I said, to keep fanboys wowed by the scale of the production and pretension. But most people will leave feeling drained and depressed, wondering how a studio can get away with holding so much," unquote. Um, if you have the words "as I said" in a review, that means you're just repeating yourself at this point. I keep getting the feeling that David's editor really let him down. I would remove "as I said." I would remove anything that was, replicated or duplicated or repeat, like, repetition of what he said before. Take out anything that's repetitive, it doesn't belong there. You've said it once, and you don't need to say it again. So I think it's unfortunate that the words "and as I said" are in this review. I also wonder why fanboys keep coming up in this discussion. That has absolutely nothing to do with the content of this film that he's actually reviewing. Absolutely nothing whatsoever. David here is also talking about most people. He says, quote, "most people," unquote, when he actually has no idea what most people would think. This goes back to the idea that he has no idea. He can't tell you what most people think because he is only one person. He cannot generalize everyone in the world who watches this film. So it's just, I just, if I was the editor, I would take stuff out, that stuff like that out. David goes on to say, quote, "How is Ben Affleck? Weighty. He's not your father's Batman. Even the mask now resembles the face of an especially sour gargoyle. And instead of dropping his voice an octave like Christian Bale, he has a mechanism for altering it. If that's to hide his identity, it seems pointless. The bat mask, it's also strange. I'm sort of nitpicking here, but uh, the sentence, if that's to hide his identity, it seems pointless. And then he puts a colon there instead of a period. I would have maybe put a period there. That's a kind of a complete thought. But he goes on to say, quote, "The bat mask covers neither." I would maybe also change that to the cowl. But I'm just nitpicking out of wanting to be an editor on this review. This review maybe could have been better if someone had just push David a little more, and that's, I just feel bad for David. He didn't have somebody who really encouraged him to be better. David, you could be great. But he goes on to say, "The bat mask covers neither the mole on Affleck's right cheek nor his distinctive dimpled chin. So it's even more beyond belief that the mayor, police chief, and rest of Gotham City wouldn't know that Bruce Wayne is Batman." But we're past all that Adam West juvenilia. Everyone seems to take for granted that Batman is Bruce Wayne, and for that matter, that Clark, with Henry Cavill's even cleftier chin, is Superman. We're in the realm of ideas, people, and near as I can tell, one somewhat similar to the upcoming Captain America picture. It's the picture. The upcoming Captain America picture, Civil War, which is evidently a battle royale over civil liberties with Captain America as Superman and Iron Man as Batman, unquote. Okay, so David describes Batman as weighty, a sour gargoyle, and that he dropped his voice. To me, all those seem like great descriptions of the character Batman, and I think from those descriptions, it seems like Affleck did a bang up job at portraying Batman. So, in my opinion, those are positive things. And also, changing the way that his voice is dropped without doing it in Christian Bale style, that should be a positive in the win column, I think, because a lot of people in the Batman Dark Trilogy fandom or the critics criticized Christian Bale's talking like this voice, and I'm not going to do that because I'm going to ruin my voice. But there was a lot of criticism from various places I didn't mind it so much, but I understood that criticism. So if they changed it because of that criticism or just trying to do something different, I don't see why that's not a positive. That should be a positive thing that it's changed and a little different. It doesn't have to be like Christian Bale; it can be something else. So I find it to be a strange criticism that he brings it up. David does have a valid point about Batman's secret identity being a giveaway in some respects, but what does that have to do with the actual content of this film? This, in my opinion, seems like a nitpick for the sake of having something negative to say, especially for a film in which Superman and Lex Luthor do figure out Batman's identity, which makes sense. They'd be two people who have motivation to do so. The average Joe in Gotham City probably wouldn't get a long enough or a close enough look at Batman to wonder if he was Bruce Wayne. And Commissioner Gordon probably wouldn't even want to know because then he'd have to deal with that at his job. It's probably best for him not to know. So I don't understand why this is even really brought up to begin with. But because even if you bring it up, like the film acknowledges some of the some of those criticisms. It's interesting that David brings up Captain America: Civil War in this review because that film, as far as I understand, was actually changed because of Batman v Superman. So David actually might have been onto something here. According to Joe and Anthony Russo, this is what they said, quote, "For our part, when we finished Winter Soldier 2 years ago," this was at the time that they were talking, "and we were thinking about doing the next one, the only thing that seemed interesting to us was to deconstruct the Marvel universe, because where else can we go at this point? There have been 11 or 12 movies so far, all with a fairly traditional structure. Our pitch to them was, people will tell you they love chocolate ice cream until you give it to them 5 days a week. It's time to give them some rainbow sherbet." Kevin Feige is a maverick, and he's very sensitive to how people are responding to his content. He said he thought that we might be right. And after they announced Batman v Superman, he said, "You guys are absolutely right. We needed to do something challenging with the material, or we were going to start losing the audience," unquote. So that's what the Russos said about Captain America: Civil War. All right, so to continue on with David's review here, he writes, quote, "The idea here is that Bruce Wayne witnesses firsthand in a prologue the partial destruction of Metropolis and the death of loved ones and blames not General Zod, but that son of a bitch, quote unquote, a Superman who, quote, brought the war to us," unquote. A sign in front of Congress calls Superman an illegal alien. Jibes. Is jibes with a G? Is that a word? I'm actually now like looking at that, questioning. I guess that's a word. Jibe, meaning to utter taunting words. Jibes pretty well with Batso's view. He tells Alfred, who played by Jeremy Irons, that even a 1% chance of another major attack justifies extra legal tactics, a naked restatement of Cheney and the neocons' famous 1% doctrine. And I'll kind of in here just interject some of my thoughts. Like this part, again, this would be such a better review if an editor took a look at this. Because if you're going to mention the Cheney aspect earlier on in the review and then mention it down here, wouldn't it make more sense to connect those things into one thought? I would probably put all the Cheney stuff, which is a valid thing to bring up, but I would maybe put all of that into one coherent thought and not like it's like the religious stuff, the Christian thematic elements. It's like scatterbrained. It's like just kind of writing off the top of your head instead of like actually organizing them in a more readable way. I don't know. That's just my thought on that. Continuing on, David writes, Alfred, by the way, is now the Chloe to Batso's Jack Bauer, manning the monitors in the Batcave while making withering cracks about Bruce's drift to the far right. We're a long way from when the butler actually buttled, unquote. And is buttled a word? My Google Docs keep being like, what is this? Okay, yeah, so it is the past tense of to serve or act as a butler. So yeah, Google Docs wants me to change it to bottled. That's why I brought it up. Okay, so just in looking at this section, personally, I don't know anyone who calls Batman Batso. So I think that's something that sort of sticks out to me. Maybe Bats or Batsy, I could maybe go with, but Batso, I don't know anyone who calls Batman that. Maybe David just got tired of having to write Batman over and over, so he played with the name a little bit. But that's definitely not a nickname for the character that I know of from any media, but maybe it's out there somewhere and I just don't know about it. So David says the butler doesn't have what does he say? He says when the butler actually buttled. Well, the butler in this case doesn't have to buttle in Batman stories. In some instances, Alfred is very involved, like in some of the comics, on Fox's Gotham TV series, and on the TV series Pennyworth. Batman v Superman was just the first film adaptation that actually allowed Alfred to have a more active role. So I think that's what is startling David here, because he's never seen it before. But it's actually a pretty common thing in Batman stories for Alfred to be a little more active. Let's see. David goes on to say, quote, Cavill's Soupy is hardly a bright counterpoint, being the guiltiest savior imaginable. Every saintly tableau, and again, this is like a blending of two sentences. He uses savior imaginable colon, and then capitalizes every saintly tableau in which he rescues innocence is offset by a Southern senator, played by Holly Hunter, calling for hearings to put some checks and balances on the alien's power. Most of Metropolis's sheeple seem to like Superman, though one woman complains that he answers to no one, not even to God. And he puts all of that in a parentheses. Why that's in a parentheses, I don't really know. The parents are of no help. Clark's mom, played by Diane Lane, tells her suffering son that he has no obligation to the world, while the ghost of his dad, played by Kevin Costner, shows up in a vision to imply that Clark has a duty to fight for those who suffer. Lois Lane, played by Amy Adams, insists that the Man of Steel gives people hope, but wonders whether her sexual relationship with him is a distraction. Must he give up love? There are also cameos by the likes of Charlie Rose, Anderson Cooper, Soledad O'Brien, Nancy Grace, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, who play themselves interviewing fictional characters and/or holding forth on the meaning of superheroes. You can't accuse Batman v Superman of lacking multiple points of view. So the only time I've ever actually heard someone call Superman soupy was in a Mixed Pitalik episode of the Superboy TV series, when he called Superboy soupy baby. So I find that to stick out to me. But again, maybe there's a whole line of stories out there that I don't know where he's called soupy. So I think that's interesting. I also wonder why David would refer to Metropolis's citizens as sheeple. If Superman did exist and he was doing good deeds around the city, wouldn't there be people who would like him from their perspective? I think it's fair for BBS to show that some people didn't want him around or had questions about him or didn't like that he existed. But then there are some people who actually did like Superman. I don't think those people would be sheeple as so much just grateful that Superman would be around to help, because maybe he did make a difference in their lives. So I don't understand why that's a problem for David here. Especially in Metropolis, like he's their hometown hero. He would probably be there more than any other places in the world. But BVS does do a good job showing all sides to that argument around Superman's existence and how he would actually have to work with the people of the world. He wouldn't just be able to do whatever he wanted to. He would have to kind of work with people. To me, it's disappointing that David references Kahina's line about not answering to God, even though we previously had a William Blake reference in the above section of the review. There's a whole references to heaven and hell and Superman being a Christ-like figure and all that kind of stuff. Like, connect those dots, David. Those are all parts of a theme. It's a thematic thing. So to me, it's disappointing just in reading the review. Like, this review could be so much better if the thoughts were organized a little bit better. In my opinion, Martha Kent is 100% correct to tell Clark that he doesn't owe the world anything, and that he never did. She's absolutely correct. David says the ghost of his dad shows up in a vision to imply that Clark has a duty to fight for those who suffer. Now, this is a different read on that scene. It's different from what I got out of that. So I think this is interesting for David to mention that here. It's giving me a little perspective on how he actually viewed the film. That conversation, in my opinion, is actually about how good deeds can come with unintended consequences, and the nightmares of those things going wrong can only be stopped because the unintended consequences, like the horses wailing in Jonathan's sleep, could those nightmares of those horses could only be stopped by having faith in the goodness of the world, and how that plays into his love for Martha Kent, and how that plays into Clark's love for Lois, and into why Superman does what he does, and his love for Lois Lane and the planet and planet Earth. So I think we have different readings here of that scene. I think David's wrong. I think thematically that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's fair that he brings that up in terms of how he saw that scene. So I'll just give him that's his reading of the scene. Also find it strange that David boils Lois and Clark's relationship down to just a sexual one, which in my opinion actually downplays what it actually is. Clark wanted Lois to marry him. He wanted to ask her to marry him. He had an engagement ring. That's more than just a sexual relationship. That's much more important. That's a marriage. That's a wedding. He wanted Lois to be his wife. That's a much bigger deal. Um, and then given the fact that Lois wears the ring at the end means that she would have said yes. So that's a much bigger deal for both of them than just a sexual relationship. Um, and David saying you can't accuse Batman v Superman of lacking multiple points of view. I like that David brings this up. I think it's absolutely true and correct, and I think that having multiple points of view actually makes the film stronger because of it. So I'm glad that David brings this up. David also says, quote, the most bizarre perspective comes from Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor, who waves his arms and in manic Aspergian fashion seem to meet anyone's eyes. Eisenberg is ham with a side of ham, a blend of the Joker and his Mark Zuckerberg. But I liked his energy. He makes a choice and goes with it, at one point letting loose with a patented supervillain falsetto giggle. Amassing kryptonite to be used against the Man of Steel, Luthor goads the surprisingly dim Batso into taking on Superman, and then announces the fight like a demented ring announcer. God versus man, son of Krypton versus Bat of Gotham, etc. Unquote. I still have no idea why people compare Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor to the Joker. I assume that David is referring to Heath Ledger's Joker, though he doesn't specify it here. But ultimately, it doesn't matter because Joker is Joker no matter which incarnation it is. Every Joker that I've ever seen kind of has the same vibe to him and characteristic that defines him. Lex and Joker are completely different, and I believe I have covered that before in these in these live streams. So I won't go into it because I've touched on it before. But really, it boils down to the fact that Lex Luthor in BVS is calculated, and he has a backup plan to his backup plan. And Joker is an agent of chaos, and he just does things. They're actually the complete opposite of each other. So I don't know why they're being compared, because it's not a comparison; it's a contrast. David goes on to say, quote, you would think that Superman should be able to take care of Batman with one mighty punch, but this paramilitary armored crusader is so souped up that he can take being hurled through walls with no apparent ill effects. Then again, bodies in these superhero movies seem to be infinitely regenerative, which means a lot of deafening crashes to no particular end. When a near indestructible Kryptonian super ogre arrives, the fighting is even more intense and more inconsequential, apart from the impact on poor Gotham City, which gets its own 9/11. It's a howler when mother love factors into the resolution, but hey, that love is the greatest superpower of all. Am I right? Unquote. Super ogre is actually a clever way to describe Doomsday, so I'll give David credit for that. Uh, but Gotham City doesn't get its own 9/11. The film makes it very, very clear, almost to an obnoxious degree, that that where they fight Doomsday is actually an uninhabited area. There's nobody there. They destroy some stuff, but there's no people there, and nobody dies on account of the Doomsday situation. And I'm trying to make sure that is correct. Yes, it's all on the uninhabited location. But if I'm wrong, somebody fact check me. But I love how reviews like this, and when I say love, I really mean them. disappointed. But I love how this review glosses over the Martha moment and how huge that is for the character of Bruce Wayne. It's actually a really monumental moment that he's actually able to save a Martha from death. He's actually able to have some catharsis to his character that when he was a child, he couldn't save his mother. He couldn't save Martha. And at the end, he was able to do something to save someone else's mother. That's a huge, huge thing for Bruce Wayne as a character. And it's disappointing to me that people choose to laugh at that moment rather than actually dig into what that means for the character and for the story, because it's actually pretty profound. David goes on to say, quote, "Lust is the second greatest. You know from the trailers that Wonder Woman, played by Gal Gadot, shows up having previously loitered in the margins of the movie. The good advance word on Gadot has centered on her wowza appearance, but she preens more than acts. Her best moments come when she laughs out loud in the middle of fighting. This dour, bombastic movie needed an infusion of joy," unquote. So David here says that Diana, or Gal, as played, Diana played by Gal, preens more than she acts, which I don't know that that's necessarily a negative thing. Diana Prince should be preening a little bit. She's supposed to be glamorous. She's supposed to preen a little bit as Diana Prince. She's a princess. She's an Amazon princess. She's supposed to preen. That's what they do. So I think, outside of her Wonder Woman duties, when she is Wonder Woman in the Wonder Woman costume, she's supposed to be preening. So I don't know. I think that's just a good representation of the character, not necessarily a negative thing. But David here uses it as a negative thing. And the word bombastic is used by another reviewer. I really need to keep a count on how many times it's used in these reviews, because they love the word bombastic. Just love it. Continuing on, David writes, quote, "Many scenes in Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice work on their own terms, and Snyder has a gift for visual poetry, but he never gets to the heart of that all-important civil liberties question. Not because the question is unresolvable, but because there can be no true ending in this superhero universe. The problem is that you can't build a coherent myth out of fragments. You can only hope that the audience will be too jolted and too turned on by the prospect of more jolts to care," unquote. So David uses the phrase "a gift for visual poetry," which is continuing to frustrate me about the lack of editing in this review. If you're going to mention visual poetry, why wouldn't you connect that back to William Blake, who was a poet? You mentioned William Blake for a reason, connected to the poetry. And the more I read of this review, and this is basically the end, there's a few little things that we're going to talk about at the end here, but connect the dots. Connect the dots. I just think there was no one who looked over this review. Nobody spent any time editing it. Nobody went with like a red pen and marked on it, because even if this review hated BVS, it could have been better. This review talks about BVS being a storytelling disgrace. Well, I think this review is actually a disgrace because it could have been better. It could have been written better. And it's disappointing for me as a reader and as somebody who would have wanted this to be a more readable review and a more meaningful review. I think if you had connected some of those, like if David had connected some of those things and expanded on those ideas, it could have actually been a really good review, even if he didn't like the film. So I'm just disappointed as a reader and as somebody who wants to talk about thoughts on a film. I think this just could have been very this could have been improved if somebody had actually gone through and pushed him a little bit on this review. Also, I'm just kind of, as I have been in this review, very perplexed on what David is talking about. He mentioned fragments. If I had the chance to ask David what he was talking about, I would wonder what he meant by the fragments in the film. What's he talking about there? Wish that could have been expanded on, but it is not. At the very end of this review, there are two corrections, which I think is funny. I don't know when these were added. Let me see if I can figure out they probably were added pretty soon after the review was published. Does it give a timetable? No, it doesn't give me when the review was actually edited. This review came out on March 23rd, 2016. So there are two additions, little asterisk notes there at the bottom of the review. The first one says, "This post has been corrected to show that the film came from the movie department of DC Entertainment." So that tells me nobody really did any editing, didn't care about the clarification and really making sure that it was correct. And then the second asterisk says, "This post has been corrected to show that Brian Boland was the artist on Batman the Killing Joke." It just takes some time to go through these things and actually make sure you're getting it right. Make sure you're explaining things as a reviewer. My advice to anybody who wants to write reviews like this is to connect the dots based on this review. I'm learning a lot about what I would tell people in terms of if I was their editor. I would say connect the dots. If you have multiple things that come up that are kind of similar, connect those dots and put them together, because it makes the point so much more robust if you kind of get into details and put more emphasis on those things. And then I would also say just go through it and make sure you're telling people the correct thing. Just make sure you're going in there, you're explaining your points, making sure that your arguments are sound. So I don't know. I just think this review, it's funny. Like, this review is dogging on a film that I love, but my disappointment in this one is not because it does that, because it hates the film that I love. It's because it's not well written, and I actually feel for David, because somebody failed him. I think David, wrote out his thoughts and wrote what he thought for the most part, even though he tended to speak for everyone in the entire world. But I think for the most part, he wanted to write out his thoughts and what his perspective was on the film. But he was let down on the post, the editing of it. So David, I wish this had been better for you. I wish this review had actually been better, and I think somebody could have helped you make it better. So that, I guess, is where I'm going to leave it here. And this is going to do it for this week's live stream. If you missed this live, I hope you'll consider sharing your thoughts in the comment section below. If you have any questions about when I'm going to be live, just check this YouTube channel. I'm going to be scheduling streams in advance when I'm available. Sometimes I'm not, and I have to push them back. But if you'll just check the YouTube channel, you'll know anytime that I'm going to be live. Try to stick to those schedules that I set for myself. So just check the YouTube channel if you ever have any questions. And if you have a Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice review that you would like to share, that you think did a good job, that is written well and makes good points and has some meaning that you got out of it, please comment below, and I will share those reviews in future videos. I want to make sure that we not only talk about the reviews that we think did a poor job, but maybe some of the reviews that we think did a great job, because I think that actually also provides value to the reader as well. I also have some links in the video description that I want to make people aware of. I'm continuing to do research or I'm continuing to do some fundraising for the Breast Cancer Research Foundation of Alabama. It's an organization that's near and dear to my heart, because I am a breast cancer survivor. But I'm also doing a little bit of a help fundraising for my friend Mike, who is a big DC fan. He actually got me hooked on Teen Titans. That's where I discovered my love of Donna Troy, and so he was he was very important, I guess. I mean, in terms of a lack of words right now, he was very important in helping me love comics and discovering comics. And so I just want to give him a shout out, because he is raising money for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. So if you want to support that great charity as well, help him out. He's trying to raise a lot of money. So just click in the video description below and give to Make-A-Wish, which is actually a really great charity and does a lot of good work, especially for kids. So if you do participate in those and would like to give, thank you in advance for doing so. Those are both great foundations and organizations that do a lot of good work. So I appreciate it if anybody does have the ability to give. Also, I think that's just going to do it for me here. So I think I'm just going to hand it over to voiceover Rebecca, and she's going to wrap up this live stream. If you would like to see more of these live streams, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel at youtube.com/duckmilkprod. If you'd like to keep in touch with me personally, you can follow me on Instagram at TheDerbyKid and on Vero at DerbyKid. You can hear my thoughts on the CW Supergirl TV series and all things Kara Zor-El over at Supergirl Radio by visiting supergirlradio.com, subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts, or subscribing to the DC TV Podcast YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/DCTV Podcasts. Also, please check out the Justice League Universe podcast for in-depth analysis on the DCEU films, including Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And before I go, I hope that this live stream video series will inspire you to think more critically and thoughtfully about film and storytelling. I'd like to leave you with this quote from C.S. Lewis's book titled An Experiment in Criticism. The truth is not that we need the critics in order to enjoy the authors, but that we need the authors to enjoy the critics. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life.